Today, there are many people who have been influenced by the ideas of Karl Marx, and if many of these people may not be fully Marxist, communist or socialist, but even so, their way of seeing the world and the decisions they make in the political, economical and social spheres are strongly influenced by Marxist ideas. Within this ideological line, there is one aspect that stands out greatly from the rest, and is most likely the most influential aspect of Karl Marx's entire ideology in the world today. This is the Marxist exploitation theory, and in today's video I'm going to demonstrate why this theory is completely wrong. But before this, we need to understand what it really means, so I'm going to explain what Marx means by his theory of exploitation. Marx's exploitation theory tells that any profit made by the capitalist class is completely illegitimate. In short, that the profits of the entrepreneur are theft, and are based on the exploitation of the worker. Marx does not refer specifically to the fact that when a person forces someone by violence or with the threat of violence to work for him, this person is committing an act of exploitation against the person who is being forced to work. Not at all. Karl Marx is not talking about this when he talks about exploitation. If this was so, I could end the video right now. Forcing a person to do something against his will using force or the threat of it is something completely immoral, exploitative and enslaving in nature. And this is something that everyone should strongly oppose. But Marx goes much further than this, because for this author, every relationship between capitalist and worker is by nature exploitative, regardless of how generous the benefits, wages, working hours, etc. may be. To better understand this, let me give an example. Let's suppose there is a person named LeBron James, and let's suppose that this person works for his employer for 30 hours a week. He has several benefits. He has annual paid vacation of 3 months and has a salary of $120,000 a year. Based on all these conditions, I think we could agree that if it's a pretty good job. If I was offered that job right now, I would stop making videos in this moment. But Marx will disagree with me, because even without the great benefits, he will argue that this person is being exploited by a capitalist. But why does he say that? Well, as we mentioned before, it turns out that Marx thinks that all profit that is obtained by the entrepreneur is theft, and that is generated through exploitation. To better understand this, let's take an example of our dear LeBron James. So let's assume that this person produces basketballs, and as we mentioned above, he's being paid annually $120,000. In addition to this, let's assume that the labor benefits he has correspond to an additional value of $80,000. All this means that the company is spending on LeBron a total of $200,000 a year. But of course, this is not all of charity. If the company is paying him this amount of money, it's because it receives an even greater amount of income in exchange for the goods and services produced by our esteemed James. Suppose that in a year, LeBron James produced 30,000 balls, and that discounting the value of the material, machinery, and his own salary, there is a profit of $2 per ball. So at the end of the year, he generated $60,000 of profit, but instead of him receiving that, the businessman is the one who gets it, even though he did not participate in the production process, and the only thing that he did was to provide the means of production, which according to Marx does not add any value, because according to him, only the labor of the worker generates an add value. So those $60,000 that the businessman received is what was taken from the worker. This is also known in Marxist jargon as surplus value, and for this very reason, Marx argues that a worker-capitalist relationship is exploitative by nature. This regardless of how much or how little he is paid, since according to Marx, for the capitalist to have profits necessarily means that he is robbing the worker, the product of his work. This by not fully remunerating him for the value he generated. But everything that I just said is something completely wrong, and this is something that has no sense. And since I have already explained what the Marxist theory of exploitation is, now I can explain why this theory is completely wrong. The biggest flaw we can find in this theory is that for Marx, entrepreneur or capitalist only provides the means of production, which according to this author does not really generate an add value, and therefore the entrepreneur or capitalist is only dedicated to parasitize the worker, and for this very reason the expropriation of these means is justified. But as we'll see later, this is completely wrong, since the means of production do not appear out of nowhere, but they have cost. Besides, the proper use of them is not trivial, and we must not forget that the entrepreneur provides many fundamental things without which production could not start, or in case it will start, it will be a much smaller and much less efficient one. Therefore, the wealth produced by the worker and the wealth available to society will be very small in comparison.
Why, you little... I got you! Go!
It's all just an act.
Stop! Stop! He's already dead.
No! I gotta get him!
Krusty the Clown, everybody.
Having said this, we can say that the things that the entrepreneur contribute are the capital or savings, the advance payment of the labor factors, the risk, and the business project. Now let's start by explaining what capital or savings is. The means of production or machinery used to increase the production process is often not cheap, so it requires a very important initial investment to start the business. This initial investment is given by the capitalist. For example, let's imagine that there is a baker named Juan. Juan's dream is to put his own bakery with an oven and everything needed to make bread. The problem is that this is quite expensive, and it has a value of $15,000. Juan is very determined to achieve his goal, so for his monthly salary of $1,000, he decides to spend less on movies, leisure, clothes. He decides to walk home instead of using the bus, and even sometimes he decides to eat a little less to get more savings. Doing all of this, he managed to save $300 a month. After almost 5 years of hard work, effort, and material deprivation, he finally managed to get enough money to set up his bakery. Having done this, he decides to hire workers and gives them the same position he had before. But if you notice, the machinery needed to make the bakery, that is to say, the means of production, was not available before. It is not that magically these resources appeared and Juan stole them, but rather that Juan obtained the money that was transformed into capital through savings. This must be strongly emphasized, since the only way of acquiring capital goods and therefore of increasing production is through savings, either personal savings or through the financial market, which channels the savings that other people made previously, days, years, decades, or even centuries ago, towards a productive process. Going back to Juan, we can say that the workers could only take advantage of those furnaces, that is to say, that could only take advantage of the means of production because Juan had previously saved enough money so that they could be more productive with the machinery. Even if Juan was to say that he no longer wants to work at all, and that he only wants to get a percentage of the profits, Juan would not be doing something wrong or exploitative, since that bakery and that machinery only exist thanks to the fact that Juan in the past deprived himself of consuming various things and later invest those savings. Having made this clear, we continue with the next point. Now it's time to talk about another thing contributed by the capitalist. It is time to talk about the advance payment of the factors of production. To understand this, let's take as an example an apartment complex. A project like this takes many years to complete. To mention some of the production phases of this example, it's necessary to obtain the capital, do the planning, verify that the land is suitable, make the plans, obtain the permits, and other things. Everything is necessary to be able to start the construction. And when it finally starts, it's not that it's done from one day to the next, but it takes a long time to build such a big building. I personally see it quite often in the street where I live. There are buildings that have been under construction for years and are still not for sale, and have not even started the sale phase. But here, there is something very important that we need to emphasize. Here we can see that the capitalist will only see his profits when these apartments are sold, and as we mentioned before, it can take years for this to happen. On the other hand, the laborers, bricklayers, engineers, architects, etc. who work on the construction site receive without exception and systematically the remuneration, that is to say, that the capitalist pays in advance the labor factor. The worker does not have to wait 5 years to wait for the project to be ready to be sold. He receives his remuneration constantly, regardless of whether the project is days, months, years, or decades away from completion. On the other hand, the capitalist will only see his profits, assuming he succeeds and does not lose money once this period of time has passed. Having said that, let us now continue with the subject of risk. Risk is something quite easy to explain. We can explain this by saying that when a company is created, whoever makes the investment with its own resources, in some cases, who gets into debt and puts its assets at risk to finance the business, is the capitalist. But not all businesses are destined to greatness. Most of them are destined to mediocrity and even failure. So in case the business goes bankrupt or has returns much lower than expected, who will lose his investment, his wealth, and his time is the entrepreneur. However, while the company works, the worker will always have his salary assured. Even if the company is in red numbers, the worker will continue to be paid. And if the company goes bankrupt or fires the worker, it's absolutely certain that he will be left without his job. But it's also very certain that the worker has never risked his patrimony, unlike the employer. So we can say with certainty that the capitalist is in charge of reducing to a great extent the uncertainty of the worker. But this is not all. There is still something else that Marx did not take into consideration. But before I say it, let me tell you that making these videos consumed me many hours, between researching, writing, recording, and editing. So I would really appreciate if you could comment on this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell, as this makes the video reach more people. Having said that, we continue with the refutation of Karl Marx. Finally, the most important thing of all is the business plan. Because you can have everything else, that is to say, that you can have a lot of capital to invest, you can be completely willing to risk your money, and you can hire the best workers. But if you start producing something that people don't want, or even producing something that people do want, but you sell it in a way or at a price that people are not willing to accept, then your whole business goes bankrupt. Which is something we have seen it happen on many occasions. This is because generating value in today's economy is quite complicated. For example, imagine that someone gives you two options. One of these is that this person will give you $500,000 without any condition. You can do whatever you want with it. The other option is that you can receive $1 million only if you commit that you have to invest it entirely in the business. So you will have to make a decision. But let me ask you something. If you take the second option, that is to say the $1 million, which is twice as much as the first one, are you sure that you will be able to generate goods and services that people are willing to consume and obtain profits through this in a context where there is so much uncertainty as there is today? And also with the great possibility that you could lose all of this money? Well, surely some of you will say that you are willing to take this risk because you have a good business plan that you believe will allow you to succeed in this venture. But unfortunately, things do not always go as planned, and probably many of the people who will choose the $1 million will end up losing their resources, and not necessarily because they are ignorant, but because generating value in an economy as complex as today's is quite complicated. For this reason, even to a group of workers could create a collective enterprise, in many occasions they decide not to take the risk and end up with the option that gives them less money, but that is obtained with the security, being this an option that gives much more peace of mind. Summarizing this without a solid business plan, and even in many occasions, in spite of having one, it's very difficult to generate value. For this very reason, whoever risks his resources and has enough vision to generate value is someone who is doing a great service for the whole society. Finally, I want to make it clear that while it's true that entrepreneurs are completely fundamental to the creation of wealth, this doesn't mean that workers are useless, but rather that both workers and entrepreneurs, when they work together free of coercion and each contributing to a greater or lesser extent the resources, is when together they achieve to create wealth and prosperity. So while it's true that an economy lacking capital, but that has many workers, is destined to poverty and misery, an economy that is capitalized but does not have enough skilled workers to perform its activities is destined to be inefficient. In conclusion, we can say that Karl Marx not only did not take into consideration the contribution of the capitalist, but he did not understand at all what the function of the capitalist was, because he did not understand everything that was mentioned previously in this video. Now, to say goodbye, I want to thank Simon, whose donation made this video possible. Do not forget to subscribe and share this video. So, I'm Rodolfo Herrera, and I said goodbye. I also want to say that I am a Mexican economist living in Mexico City, so if my English is a bit rough or a bit incorrect, I want to say sorry, but I'm doing my best, and let's go, Jets! I don't know, whatever Americans like, football, soccer!